Very good evening, everyone. My name is Ranbir Singh, your host and host for today's event. I represent IEEE Client Services for India, Middle East, Asia, Africa, Bangladesh, and Nepal. A very warm welcome to all attendees across India. At the outset, I hope all of you are safe and healthy and following the guidelines of MHA. As all of you are very well aware that IEEE has been conducting author workshops since 2014, and this year, due to these unprecedented times, we have gone virtual. So this is the part 2 of Open Author Workshop dedicated to faculty member, research scholars, authors. We have conducted the first part on 1st of October, which was more focused on the fundamentals of publishing and authoring, and which was being attended by over 300 students. So this gives me immense pleasure to introduce our today's speakers. We have two eminent personalities. Our keynote speaker is Professor Gaurav Sharma from University of Rochester, Editor-in-Chief IEEE Transaction Image Processing. And our second speaker and my colleague, who is my colleague, Dr. Dhanu Kumar, and he's a senior IEEE Client Services for India and Sri Lanka. Some of the housekeeping things before we start. All lines are muted by default. So if you have any question, please use the Q&A. And I repeat, please use the Q&A panel instead of chat box. We will definitely have some time in the end, but I would request, please do not hold your questions. Rather, post it immediately in Q&A channel as and when you feel like it. If due to any unfortunate technical reason, you logged out of WebEx, you can pen down the live streaming link that is there, the tiny URL link. You can join the session from our YouTube channel as well. So before I start, I would like to thanks my colleague from EBSCO Information Services in helping us to promote the session across all libraries of India, and my colleague from US, Michelle, Joanne, and Kate, for the promotion from their end. And also a special thanks to Professor Sharma to accept this invitation. And if I'm not wrong, I think this is the fourth time that Professor Sharma is addressing the students and faculty community from India. And we wish that in future also, Professor Gaurav Sharma will continue to update and motivate us towards publishing and research. So let's quickly understand the flow of next 60 minutes. I'll start with a brief introduction of who we are and what we do, and then I will hand it over to Professor Gaurav Sharma, who will give you the deep dive of publishing and probably focus more on the best practices to minimize the rejection rate. And then my colleague, Dr. Dhanu Kumar, will highlight the various initiatives taken by IEEE in the best interest of authors, and some slides on IEEE Xplore Digital Library that can help you in various ways to fuel up your research and innovation. So who we are the world's largest technical membership association of individuals. There are 4,20,000 individual members across 160 countries. Typically, we are a non-profit organization. The mission and vision of our organization is advancing technology for the benefit of humanity. To publish journals, there are around 200 journals. We sponsor and co-sponsor around 2,000 conferences a year. So that means 4 to 5 IEEE conferences are happening every day somewhere in the world. We are also a leading standard developer. Today, I think if we are able to connect through this webinar, because IEEE has given a set standard. So one of the very known standard of IEEE, that is 802.1, last year more than 3 billion devices were being shipped on that standard. We also have a robust collection of ebooks. There are 7 ebook collection, and we do have e-learning courses for working professional, wherein you can refresh your memories on the various concepts, and you can gain the PDH and CEUs. So while we are here today, during our analysis and study of author groups in the beginning 2014, one of the common questions that came up was, why not IEEE does author workshop to help researchers, especially new authors, in submitting their papers successfully. So when we launched these author workshop in 2014, only from India, there were more than 1,200 attendees. So the core purpose of these workshops is to enhance the publishing ability of faculty members, researchers, authors, and industry professionals. So again, I would say please do not hesitate to submit any question pertaining to authorship today. One of the other primary reason for conducting this author workshop is the acceptance rate, especially from Asian countries. So if you look at India itself, you'll see that we have only 15% of acceptance rate. What does it mean? It means 8 out of 10 papers get rejected when it comes to journal publication. You will notice that there is some visible improvement since 2014, and at IEEE, we continue to take such initiative in the advancement of research and publishing for the benefit of humanity. So with this, I will hand it over to Professor Gaurav Sharma. So I have made you the presenter now.
Thank you.
Yeah. Over to you, Professor.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's my pleasure to be here. I hope everyone is doing well and staying safe and healthy. So today I'm going to be talking about how to publish a technical paper with IEEE. All right. So just before we begin, just some scope for this and context for this. As Ranbir already mentioned, this is the second in a series of 2 workshops that IEEE is conducting in October for authors in India. And today's focus is intended for authors who are already familiar with the basics of publishing. There'll be some parts in common and some things I will cover in common between the 2. But the one which was intended to be for folks who are new to publishing was on October 1. Okay. The presentation is meant to be interactive. So even though we are all remote, the intention is for you to be able to ask questions. So please ask questions or clarifications on the WebEx using the Q&A function or the chat function. Okay, and the questions which will bubble up, Ranbir and Dhanu will accumulate those and then ask these questions to me on your behalf. Okay, and again, they will prioritize this based on the focus of the talk. All right. Okay. So here's the outline for the segment which I will be speaking about. So I'll begin with the brief introduction to my background, particularly how it relates to this talk, and then cover several of the common questions that arise when people are new to publishing or fairly new to publishing. Okay. And then finally, Dhanu will talk about next steps, and we'll also mention some additional resources that you will have in terms of references. All right. So in my day job, I'm a professor at the University of Rochester in Rochester, New York. This is upstate New York, about 360 miles from New York City. Okay. And I have research in a diverse number of areas, as I mentioned over here. And accordingly, I also participate not only in my main department, which is electrical and computer engineering, but also have secondary appointment in computer science and biostatistics and computational biology. So this is where I'm located. This is New York City over here. The X is marking the spot roughly where Rochester is located. And it's located on the banks, our campus is located on the banks of River Genesee, which flows northward into Lake Ontario. Over here is Canada on the other side of the lake. And then this is our campus in a nice summer day, which you see the River Genesee flowing here. And when I'm on campus, I'm normally in this building that you see over here. Obviously, right now I'm addressing you from home. And the University of Rochester is a small private university located in upstate New York. It has 3 campuses. What you're seeing over here is the River campus. Additionally, we have the downtown campus, which has the School of Music, one of the best schools of music in the Western world. And over here, the medical center with which we collaborate quite a bit. And this is our library on a nice summer day. So with that quick introduction to my sort of employment background, I'll talk a little bit about my background as it relates to publications. Over the course of my career, I worked both in industry and academia and have authored a good number of publications. I'm also an inventor on a number of patents. I currently serve as the editor-in-chief for the IEEE Transactions and Image Processing and have previously served as editor-in-chief for the SPI and ISNT Journal of Electronic Imaging. This is not an IEEE journal, but a journal published by SPI and ISNT. And I've been a member of the IEEE Publication Services and Products Board for a substantial amount of time. And I've also participated in other editorial boards, conference technical committees, and so on. So the reason I want to summarize this is what I'm talking from is from my experience as an author, as a volunteer, and as a long-standing member of IEEE. Okay, I've been a member of IEEE since 1989 when I was an undergraduate student, and I'm currently proud to be a fellow. So before we begin, I'd like to just sort of have some discussion about why you may want to publish. Okay. So I think Newton is credited with having said, I've seen thus far because I stood on the shoulders of giants. Okay. So this is the tradition in science that has been established. You people who discover new things or invent new things will publish those for the benefit of the community, and then other researchers will take that and build upon it and go further. Okay. So the primary motivation is to share discovery and knowledge. It also brings recognition in the scientific field to people who are originators of those ideas. Okay. So in some degree of a program, this may be required. There may be a requirement that you publish a certain number of papers. That may be a motivation for some of you. I would also like to highlight some of the secondary benefits that come with publishing your work. And this is important for you to keep in mind in case you're thinking, what is the relevance? How will this help me? I think writing a paper really develops your communication and presentation skills because you have to argue your case for why this paper is worth merits publication. And this is critical in almost all careers, no matter where you go in engineering as a career, this will be important for you. So it's great to learn that skill. Importantly, writing also promotes better understanding of your own work. So you think you understand your own work, but when you start writing and presenting it is when you will be required to logically organize it. And this really promotes a clarity of thought, which is much harder unless you're trying to do this. So I think somebody is typing. If you would not mind muting, I would request that anybody else who's typing may please mute. All right. All right. And then importantly, writing is also a time when you get new ideas. Okay. So both when you're writing yourself as an author is when you will have a variety of questions because you're forced to justify every step you've done. Also, others reading your paper will get a variety of new ideas from your presentation of those ideas. Okay. So with that motivation for why you may want to write a paper, I will jump into today's author workshop. And these are the topics that I will cover, okay, in sequence. And depending upon the time that I have, I will possibly speed through some of these, go through some of these in a faster manner and others in a slower fashion. The slides themselves will be shared with you, so you will have access to the full slide deck. Right. Okay. So when you're writing a paper, the first thing to keep in mind is sort of what avenue you're addressing, whether you're writing this for IEEE journal or a conference. So you have this option of choosing between a journal and a conference. And this is a common question that arises. So it's probably good to address this right in the beginning. Okay. What are the differences between the two? So a journal article is intended to be a comprehensive report on an original research investigation. So what comprehensive means is that questions within the scope of the article have been addressed to their logical conclusion. So you're driving all questions which logically lie within the scope of the article and taking them to their logical conclusion and have investigated all of them appropriately. A conference article, on the other hand, can report work in progress. So it can be something which is preliminary. You've not yet completed all the work and is therefore not comprehensive. Okay. So the differences between them are this nature, which is one is expected to be much more complete work and polished. The other one can be work in progress. The one advantage of conference articles is typically you can use those to establish precedents of ideas. So if you have a good idea and you've done some initial work on that, you can present that, and then you have the timestamp with the publication of a conference paper that you originated those ideas. Importantly, for authors who are starting out, this also provides a venue for you to get feedback on your research. Okay, when you present your article at a conference, there are people who will come and see and then interact with you. These days, it may be virtually. In normal times, it will be in person. And from that feedback, they can even give you guidance about, what this other work you may want to look at, or these directions you may wish to consider. And that's often very valuable because these are people who know the area you're talking about. Okay. Typically, conference articles are fairly short, and journal articles are relatively long compared to those. So a typical length in the Signal Processing Society, which is my primary home society, is that the conference articles are 5 pages, in which the 5th page is reserved for references, and journal articles are often typically more like 11 to 13 pages. This is the common length. Some things to keep in mind when you're considering these options. Journals are obviously considered more prestigious than conferences. These are more polished work and considered much more sort of a thorough investigation of a topic and authoritative. So obviously, a good number of the articles which are submitted, manuscripts which are submitted to a journal, are actually rejected. Okay, and you have to have the appropriate thoroughness in order to make a journal article. Conferences are recognized as being the place where the leading edge work is presented with an IEEE. But if you're submitting to a conference, you're also making a commitment to actually present your article in person. And if the article is not presented, it may be suppressed in IEEE Xplore, meaning that it will never quite be published formally and will not be indexed in databases. Okay. The policies are particularly going through some changes right now. Particularly in normal times, you're required to present in person. Nowadays, virtual presentation is also allowed due to the current pandemic situation. Okay, so please look at this for the conference that you're targeting specifically. So when writing an article, much like making a presentation, you want
Professor?
Sure.
Yeah,
ahead.
we have a question on the previous slide. Can
Sure.
conference paper and journal have open-ended conclusions?
Yes, conference papers and journals can have open-ended conclusions. It depends on the nature of article you're writing. So if you're writing an original research article, then it's expected that it will at least have some firm conclusions, and there may be others which may be open-ended. If you're writing, for instance, a position paper or something which is just starting out in a field, then you may have more open-ended conclusions.
Sure. Thank you, Professor.
You're welcome. Okay. So to write your paper, I think the first recommendation I would give to you is to keep your audience in mind throughout as you're finding a venue for writing a paper. Okay. So if you're looking to choose a conference or a journal, you can actually, I suggest you look at the journal itself and look at its scope. The scope defines what is considered by the journal as relevant to its audience. Okay. Now, in addition to the scope, I would also suggest you look at what articles they've published, because they really reflect what kind of articles they would want. Okay. And this gives you a much better idea of what is the focus of this journal, whether it's on the methodology and application or on the application. It's possibly what is the level. So for instance, if you've got a magazine, you normally want it to be broadly accessible. That will be at a lower technical level. If you're looking at one of the transactions or journals, typically it's at a higher level. You expect people to already have the background. Okay. So if it's a student publication, often you will have tutorials. So this focused level and depth is something you will get an idea for by looking at the articles already published in the journal. Okay. Similarly, for a conference, you have to keep this in mind by looking at articles in past versions of the conference. In addition, for a conference, you want to look, in addition to finding whether it's a good match with your research, you should also check the submission deadlines and the conference schedule. Okay, so that you know that this is the deadline by which your research needs to be ready for submission. And also for the actual conference dates, you have to ensure that you'll be able to present in person or remotely, as the case may be, okay, according to the conference policy. So one tip for this is that if you are in doubt, please ask an experienced faculty or colleagues for recommendations. Often good recommendations will come from your faculty or colleagues. Some tools and resources that IEEE provides in order to find relevant publications. There's a publication recommender in which you can look at publications and try and find one which would be appropriate for your publication. Other good sources are look at the publication cited in your references. What are you citing? If you're building upon prior work that you are citing, then that's obviously an appropriate venue for you to consider. This is where prior work on this topic has appeared, so that would be an appropriate venue. You can do a keyword search also in places like IEEE Xplore and figure out where is the work related to your topic being published. And I already covered this, ask colleagues and co-authors. And in addition to finding this, I strongly recommend you should follow up and look at papers that have already appeared in your prospective venue. for instance, in IEEE Xplore or in whatever database that you're looking at. Okay. And then this gives you also a calibration. You can assess your work against the published work in terms of the set expectations for length, the level, and the format, and so on. One recommendation that I will make is that do not go purely by impact factor. I think a lot of people these days have made impact factor the be all end all and would like to decide a journal based on, oh, this is the impact factor of the journal. I think the journal's reputation in the community is much more important than the impact factor. And this is particularly important for new and emerging areas where you will often have a new journal. The impact factor takes a while to get established. Also, there are wide variations in impact factor between different communities. In certain communities, people tend to have much larger number of citations. In other communities, the citation counts are lower. So do not just judge by an impact factor. Okay. IEEE also provides a number of other metrics, such as number of downloads and patent citations, which you can find from IEEE Xplore. One other consideration to keep in mind if you're publishing in a journal is to think about what type of journal you're publishing in. So traditional journals were what were referred to as subscription journals, where user or the libraries are paying for access to these. Okay. Nowadays, you also have open access journals in which the author has to pay publication fees, and the users can then download for free. So to keep this in mind, if you're considering an open access journal, you have to keep in mind that you are committing to also pay the article processing charges in order to get your article published. Okay. And then there are also hybrid journals in which most articles are traditional, but some can be open access. This is an author choice. This is a choice that you can exercise at the time of submitting your article. So with that brief introduction in terms of how to choose your publication venue, I will now go into some nitty-gritty details of how to write your paper and give you some guidance. Obviously, this is something which is a topic which can take a long time. So I will just give you some hints and some high-level guidance based on what I have from my experience, what I've learned from my experience. Okay. So this, sure, go ahead.
Yeah. So before we jump onto this part of presentation, the question is on the initial level, is it good to publish article in magazines if author have not yet published with any IEEE journal?
So it depends on the nature of the magazine article. There are magazines have a number of columns, a number of sort of overview and tutorial articles. Okay. So if you are doing an opinion column, for instance, maybe you've done something for your course, you've developed something for a course you're teaching, that could go in the education column of a magazine. If on the other hand, you have not previously published a technical article, then writing a review or tutorial, overview or tutorial becomes much more challenging. That's not what I would ask you to attempt as the first starting point. And usually the magazines are looking for people who are already established as a way to provide guidance to the, yeah.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you, Professor.
You're welcome. Okay. All right. So keep the audience in mind. This is something which I already emphasized earlier. So keep the audience in mind, and the best way to look at it is what has been published in that venue before. So the content should be appropriate to the level, scope, and the depth for the venue. Okay. Obviously, it should be original. So you should not be looking to publish the same work in another place. And it can either be addressing a totally new problem or extending published work. So you can do both things. You should validate your methods and present clear rationale for what you're presenting, and appropriately use illustrations, tables, and graphs, and cite references. So I'll talk about each of these in turn as I go through the structure of a paper and what you have. Okay. Before I do that, I would like to make a point here. I think as engineers, we learn best from concrete examples. If you're given a concrete example, we can see how that applies in general. Okay. So the best advice I have for somebody who's trying to start or learning how to write well is to first start reading. Okay. And you want to read both extensively and intensively. Extensively means you're reading quite broadly, a lot of articles, but maybe not in that much depth. And intensively are the few ones which are directly related to your research. And those ones you should read in extreme depth, really understand thoroughly. Good places to start are IEEE magazines because these are overview articles or tutorial articles. And for those who are students among our audience, I would also strongly recommend IEEE Potentials. I found this tremendously valuable in my own time as both an undergraduate student and a graduate student. Okay. And similarly, you can look at tutorials or surveys in journals. Okay. when you start reading, you go through a variety of stages as a reader. And this is something which I want to emphasize. In the first stage, you'll actually find that maybe you don't understand a lot of the material. So in that situation, you should be trying to connect back to what you know. Okay, so you should be tracing back the references. And in the second stage, you start following what is written. In the next stage, you start discriminating between what is presented well and what is not presented that poorly, what is not presented that well, or what is presented poorly. Okay, so you want to read till you get to that point, because that's the point at which you want to start emulating the papers which are written well, not copying, but emulating, understanding what process the author went through in their mind in presenting the ideas, and try and adopt a similar process yourself. And when you get to this stage, you also will be able to start to understand what is unwritten in the article. Okay, so what kind of things the authors did not write because they were weaknesses of the technique, or because these were ideas which could go beyond this article. These become possible inspiration for you to work on as your own research. Okay. And yeah, so this is the biggest advice I'll give you, is to first focus on reading, because that really develops your skills in terms of writing also. So with that, I'll then do one. So I'll talk to the elements of a manuscript and give you some guidance in terms of the specific writing specific elements of a manuscript and how you want to approach these. Okay. For this, I'll use one of my own papers as an example. This is a paper which was published on the IEEE transactions and image processing a while back, before I was the EIC. And I'll cover the different elements such as title, authors, abstract, introduction. So the different elements are listed over here. And I'll touch upon several of these to give you some guidance and items to keep in mind as an author.
Professor?
Sure.
So there's one question popping out again and again, a common question, a difference between journal, magazine, and IEEE transaction.
Okay. So firstly, transactions and journals is just a matter of naming. Transactions and journals are both journals in the common sense of the word. Okay, so there's not much difference between transactions and journals except in the way they are named. The difference between these journals and magazines is that the journals are meant to be primarily venues for publishing original research. So you're looking for something which is advancing the state of the art and really taking things beyond it. Okay, the audience for it is meant to be people who are already familiar with the basics, and they're looking to look at just the new advance. So the introductory material there will be shorter. You'll be having few tutorial and review papers, but they are not the main focus. The main focus is original research. Okay, so the article is meant for somebody who's already experienced in the field. So you should not be wasting the time with a lot of tutorial material or reviewing material which you would already find in the textbook. Okay, for a magazine, on the other hand, the intention is for this to be broadly accessible. So you will not be going into that much depth, but you're giving an overview to the community of what is the state of the art and also how to maybe work on a specific problem. So you could have either an overview article or tutorial article. So that's the primary difference, is the audience. Okay, the audience for one is meant to be a focused technical community in a given area. In the other case, it's meant to be broadly accessible to a much wider audience. Any other? Okay, hopefully that clarifies the nature of things. You're welcome. All right. Okay. All right. So the opening of your paper is the title. And the title is actually your attempt to try and describe the content of a paper with the fewest possible words. Okay, so you want it to be crisp and concise and use keywords, but avoid jargon. Okay, so I'll give you a couple of examples. The first one is really a made up title, which I could use for every paper that I write. How we solved an important problem in a certain application. Okay, and what's bad about this is it tells me nothing. It really tells me nothing about what problem that I really attempted, what is the application setting, and how I solved it. Okay, it's only the second title is the one which I've from the paper which I've chosen as the running example for this part. This is per color channel barcodes for mobile applications. So it's telling you what the paper is about. It's about color barcodes. What is the application setting? Mobile applications. It's also telling you what is the basic idea over here. So it's per color and channel framework. And what is the new contribution? The interference cancellation. So this title is a little bit on the longer side, but it is meeting the different requirements of telling you what is the content of the paper in these few words. The next sort of element after the title is the abstract. And this is extremely important. Often authors starting out on publishing will assemble their article and they'll think they'll put together the abstract at the very end. Okay. And I would strongly recommend that you should not adopt that practice. Give this the due thought and importance that it deserves. Okay. So the abstract is a condensed version of the article, which in something like 150 to 250 words is trying to cover everything about significance, novelty, findings, and conclusions. Okay, so why is this useful and important? What you did, how is it different from what has been done previously, and what are the main findings and conclusions? Okay, so it's a self-contained short version of the article. It's quite challenging to do this in 150 to 250 words. I think this is saying attributed to Mark Twain. I would have written you a shorter letter, but I did not have the time. Writing in brief actually, paradoxically, takes more time than writing at length because you have to be very selective and you have to decide how to convey the most information in the fewest possible words. Right. Why is this so important? When your article is published, there is so much material being published today that a reader will not have the time to go through the entire article before they decide whether they're going to read it. If they will first look at the title, then they will look at the abstract, and at that point, this will determine whether they read the rest of the article. Importantly for you as an author, several of the decisions in the peer review process will also depend upon the title and the abstract. Okay. So as editor-in-chief, when I get a submission to my journal, we get about 200 submissions a month. So obviously, I will not have the time to read each one in detail. Okay. When I look at a submission, I will look at the title and the abstract. And if the abstract, after reading the abstract, I cannot make out what is the contribution of this to the scope of my journal, what do you think the reaction is? I think the authors have not done their work, so it's a reject, and the authors are the ones who are responsible for fixing things before they submit. Okay? So you should plan to spend a significant amount of time on the abstract rather than making this an afterthought. That's the guidance I would give you. Okay? And a well-polished abstract will really help you in terms of both clarity of your rest of your article and having clarity of understanding of your work. So here's an example from the paper that I chose. This is the abstract. I will not read all of it in the interest of time, but just highlight a few points. It's covering what we did. So we have a color barcode framework for mobile phone applications. It's covering how we did it. So we used the 3 channels, red, green, blue channels, for capture and the corresponding printing channels for embedding the barcode. Okay. What is the challenge? The challenge here is interference between the channels, and to address that, we do a modeling of the interference between the channels and estimation of the channel parameters using either machine learning approaches or typical design of the barcode. All right. Then it's also covering what are the main results. Okay. So what have we accomplished and how this moves the field forward. So we get 3 times the data rate, that's emphasized over here. And then it can be used for both any type of barcode, including QR and Aztec codes is what we've done the experiments on, and what the main results are. We successfully overcome the impact of color interference and get this higher data rate. Okay. So that's a few things about this abstract, how it covers all the different bases. It's in the first person present tense. That is the current accepted way of writing in the most engineering journals. Okay. You should avoid unneeded words or sentences and be specific to the extent possible, focusing on the audience. Okay. So one point to make over here is above all the rules I will tell you, you should exercise the rule of common sense. Okay. Some things which are not that great about this abstract, it's a little bit on the longer side. It's not that short. Why? Well, so in this journal, the familiarity with these printing channels and so on may be limited. So in order to give the due context, we have a little bit more detail, and that makes the abstract a bit longer. So that was a deliberate choice on our part, okay, to make it more accessible to a broader audience. Secondly, we don't have any quantitative summary of the findings. Normally, when you want to give a summary of the findings, you want to make it quantitative and specific. Okay. Here we had done experiments with a number of different types of codes. Providing quantitative numbers for all the different cases would make the abstract even longer. So that was the trade-off over here, trying to make this not that long. Here's another example of an abstract, which I will critique. This is an example I took from arXiv, okay, last year. And if you look at the title, two-way coding and attack decoupling in control systems under injection attacks. So by reading this, I really, even if I'm in the field, in the closely related field, I do not immediately have an idea of what this article is about. Okay. Going through the abstract itself, the opening words are in this paper. Well, we know everything that you'll be talking about in the abstract will be relating to what you're talking about in this paper. So these three words are completely redundant and needless. It goes on, we introduce the concept of two-way coding, which originates in communication theory. So if you read this, after this, and try and understand the questions, what you did. The screen is not visible. Somebody is saying the screen is not visible. I'm hoping it's only for the one person. Okay.
Yeah, it is
What
visible.
you did, okay, what you did, how the results apply is really, these questions are not answered. And I think though this abstract has the advantage that it is fairly short, it has the disadvantage that the authors are selling themselves fairly short. This is your opportunity to reach a broader audience with what you've done by making it easy for them to understand how this could relate to what they're working on. You would make your article much more accessible. So I would recommend you spend a good amount of time on the abstract in doing this. After the abstract, the next section is typically the introduction. And for starting authors, this is the most challenging section to write. Okay. So this is where you describe the problem that you researched, and you go through this in a step-by-step phase, where you begin first with the motivation. You highlight why this problem was of interest. Why is this something which the community should care about? Move on to going generally known information about the topic. What is sort of commonly known information? Then prior studies specific to your research. So you're moving from a very general orientation to things which are increasingly specific. Over here, you're talking about literature broadly published in this area. Over here, you're talking about things which are specific to what you're doing in this case. Finally, you have an overview of the work, what you have done, summarizing the results, and importantly, the contributions. So you typically are looking for this in the introduction as a contribution statement. And traditionally, the last part of the introduction is how the article is organized. Okay. So in introduction, you should try and be specific rather than vague. You should aim for this to be a good rule of thumb for a journal article, which is about 10 pages, is to aim for about 2 pages for the introduction rather than making it much longer. That gives the appropriate balance to your work. Okay. These days, also the common convention is this should be written in the present tense. Okay. One common thing when considering this literature that you're talking about, both the generally known information about the topic and the information prior work directly related to your research, this should not be just person A did this, person B did this, person C did this. Okay. You should try and give some structure to this. So there are 3 types of techniques that have been developed for this problem. They're organized in this manner, and then organize those techniques in that context. So rather than giving just an aggregation of disconnected summaries of past works, give it a structure and give it your opinion. Okay. In terms of how things are structured. Also avoid needlessly repeating the same point. Okay. And also avoid tangential and irrelevant discussions. So if there is something which is not directly relevant to your work, but a tangential connection, that's something you can probably defer to after you presented your case for your work as a point in the discussion later.
So, Professor?
Sure.
Yeah. So this question, quite interesting question, and they're saying that if we are doing an analysis on an existing topic with more depth, but there are no new findings, can we make it to the conference?
So if you've done the analysis on an existing topic, okay, so there's 2 kinds of analysis that you could do. One is an experimental and empirical analysis, where you compare different techniques and you compare how they perform, maybe on a common data set, which they may not have been compared on before. So that could be one thing which could weigh, and that would be a useful contribution to a conference. And depending on the journal, it may also be useful for a journal. Okay. On the other hand, you have an algorithm somebody has developed, and then you are trying to analyze that. That may also be a useful contribution. In that case, I would say that you actually have some novel findings. If you say this algorithm has a certain type of complexity, or this part of this algorithm has this complexity that you need to keep in mind, that would also be useful. So analysis by itself does not preclude the novelty part, is what I would say. Okay. Now, if you're just going to say, okay, this person did this, if you're doing just a literature survey, if your analysis consists of just a literature survey, that is not novel. And that really would, you will have a difficult time finding an appropriate venue to publish that. Okay.
Sure.
Thank you. All right. So moving on to the next section in a paper that you will typically have in the engineering community is the methodology. This is where you are formulating your problem. So I already said you talked about the problem in the introduction, but over here you're doing this in much more detail compared to the introduction, using text, equations, and figures, formulating what are the problems that you're trying to solve. And if you're doing a hypothesis-driven research, you're going to try and also outline what is the hypothesis which you're looking to prove what is proved. Okay. And here you will use figures, as I mentioned. Typically, the idea would be to use illustrations to provide an overview and illustrate the interconnections. So from the paper that I'm mentioning in my running example, here is the example showing the encoding. It's really simple. You have 3 barcodes in the 3 colors that you print in, cyan, magenta, yellow, and the overlay of those produces the barcode. If you were to describe this in words, it would be much more challenging to make this concept very clear in words. That's the kind of illustrations you want to have. So the common saying is a picture is worth 1,000 words. If you choose the right illustration and develop it well, you can clearly convey this concept using the illustration rather than having a lot more words in your article. The next section is really the section where you present your results and have a discussion on the results. So the idea is to not have everything that you've done. So this should be selective and should present summarized data rather than all of the data that you've done in the course of your experiments. Okay. And so it should be clear and concise. So you're aiming for this to be brief and to the point. And you should use figures and tables to illustrate your findings in this section. The figures here are going to be typically graphs, which are showing relationships between, or bar charts, which are showing relationship between the data, different data points and the trends in the data. And the tables are what you would use if you want to give precise numerical values. These are important for you. In some cases, you may want to do both. And one thing you can do these days with most publications is that you include the graph, which is much better for somebody who's reading the paper in the paper itself. And the tables you can include in supplementary data so that if somebody else repeats the experiments and wishes to compare, they have the numerical values. As the opening part of the results and discussion, you should also have a sort of description of what was the experimental setup, what data sources you used and why. What metrics are you going to use for the analysis? Okay. If these are well known in the community, you don't have to justify them. If they're not well known, you have to actually also justify why you've chosen these. Okay. So there was a question.
Yeah. So there's a question on the same slide, and and they say like, please discuss a myth related to IEEE transaction. And the myth is it impossible to publish in periodical without complex maths, figures, and graphs? Many authors are afraid of rejection only on this point.
So you should use the tools which are appropriate for presenting your work. If you want to give, if you need equations, you should have the equations. If you don't need the equations, you should not have needless equations. And so there isn't sort of a one size fits all answer. It depends on the nature of the work and nature of what you're presenting. Okay. Now, in most engineering and scientific publications, if you're going to give precisely a statement of or steps to do something, then usually stating that mathematically as an equation, as a series of steps in an algorithm, is a more precise way. So naturally, in most of the publications in IEEE, this will be a common ingredient. But it isn't that because you don't have an equation is why the article is rejected. It's because you don't have the right way of presenting. If the right way to present is using equations and you didn't really have those, then that is clearly a deficiency. Okay, if you're trying to describe in words which in equations could be put much more concisely and precisely, then you're using the wrong tools. Okay, so don't use a hammer where you need a screwdriver. Use the tools appropriate to what you're trying to present. And the myths get commonly propagated, but if you use the tools appropriate, both the reviewers and the editorial board members will recognize that you're doing the right things. All right. So in addition to the results, in this section, you will also have a discussion which is interpreting the results for the reader and guiding the reader through these. Okay. So you're trying to highlight how your research offers a new solution, how it is beneficial for the community. Also, you should acknowledge limitations of your work over here. Why? Because if you don't acknowledge these limitations, the reviewers will pick on these quickly. Okay, so by acknowledging these yourselves, you're diffusing the reviewer criticism. So if there are also connections with other work, which are better appreciated after you've described your proposed work, this is the place to provide them, not the introduction. Okay, in the introduction, your descriptions would be vague because you want to relate them to what you're going to propose. So this would be an appropriate place to present them, such connections, which are a little bit more distant and maybe more tangential to the. Following the results and discussion section is the final, usually the final section of the main paper, which is the conclusion. You may have some appendices, which may have additional technical details, but conclusion is usually the formal final section of a paper. Okay. The word conclusion in English has two meanings. It can mean what did you conclude, what did you find, and it can also mean the ending part of something. Okay. So I would go with the meaning that it's really a listing of what is it that you've concluded? What is it what has the research achieved? So rather than making this a repeat of the abstract, you should try and summarize what are the main findings and what are the implications of those findings for the field. Okay. So don't make this just a full replication of the abstract, which covers all the elements of the paper, but focus on the main findings and implications for the field. Okay. How is this useful? Also, this is a place to mention things like where work may be extended. Okay. In doing so, in suggesting future areas of research, you should be careful. Things which are sort of directly within the scope of this paper itself, you should not propose as future areas of work. Because if you're proposing this future areas of work, the immediate response will be, this should be done within this manuscript itself. Okay. So the future areas of research truly should be future rather than something which is in the scope of the manuscript itself. Okay. You should also present both the benefits and shortcomings of your solution and your research and methodology. Okay, it's good to be upfront and to acknowledge these rather than to have the reviewers poke holes in your arguments based on these. So here's an example of the conclusion from the paper that I talked about. Okay, so this is just summarizing what the main findings are. What we presented was a framework, not just a particular technique. What it achieves, it offers 3 times the data rates, how it achieves that, and the limitations. Although bit error rates vary across 3 channels, they're in the range which you can deal with the error correction codes. Following the conclusion is really the way you list the references. So the references that you've cited. So this is an important point I would like to make. The citations that you make in your paper serve dual purposes. Firstly, they're establishing the context for your research. What is the related work? What is the work that's been done before? But they're also acknowledging sources of ideas. And you want to keep in mind that the purpose of references is both of these. Okay. You want to give clear credit to ideas which have originated by others. What is the right place to cite that depends upon how well known the idea is and how accepted it is. Okay. If the idea is something as well known as maybe say Newton's laws of motion, okay, then you don't really need to cite anything. You're saying force is equal to mass times acceleration. That is by now very common knowledge. Everybody also knows Newton originated it. So it's not something for which you want to cite a reference. Okay. On the other hand, it may be something which is known in the specific technical community and maybe not that prominent, in which case you may want to try and cite something from a textbook, well-known textbook in that case. If it's something which is fairly new and novel, then you want to cite the appropriate publication where this first appeared. Okay. So you want to have citations which are accomplishing both of these purposes, establishing the context for research, as well as acknowledging the source of the ideas. There is no limit to the number of references, but you should actually use only those that directly support your work. Okay. And the references should have complete information, should be formatted according to the conventions for the publication. Okay. IEEE publications normally follow a citation numbering system where you will have the citations listed number, usually in the order of appearance, though sometimes they can be in order of alphabetic order by last name. And then the formatting is different for the different type of entries. So here you have an example of a couple of things from journals. One is from the first two are from journals. Third one is from a conference. You see where the page numbers are. They're different places. Last one is an example of something from a book. Okay. So check on the official published versions of the citations from the publications for what is the formatting requirement. And a strong recommendation I would have is to use a citation manager like BibTeX, Zotero, EndNote, Mendeley, whatever you are comfortable with for consistency. And a good tip in this regard is to try and download the complete citation record for IEEE publications from IEEE Xplore. If there are other publications, download them from the author publisher's website. That way you have the complete and authentic version rather than relying on incomplete information you may find elsewhere in places like Google Scholar, for example. All right. So in the interest of time, I'll probably skip over this very quickly. But before you submit your article, so you've written your article before you submit, you've thought of the audience, written your article before you submit, also think about what is required. And IEEE actually has a checklist that you can use for this. Okay. We make sure you review the submission guidelines for the target publication and also determine who is the corresponding author. And this is important. Okay. As a corresponding author, you are the main interface with the publication, and you want to understand your responsibilities as a corresponding author. In particular, you should make sure you get approval from all authors prior to submitting and see that they may agree with the content. Okay. Once you've submitted your article, it goes through what is referred to as peer review. And since this is what determines whether your article gets published or not, it's important to try and understand this. So I'll give you an overview of the peer review and publications process. This is what happens after you submit, after you click submit for your paper in a typical journal workflow. A conference workflow is similar in many regards, but there are also some differences, minor differences. All right. So the article will go through a number of filters, as I'm showing over here. This is you as an author submitting your manuscript. The first filter will be the journal staff. They will look to see whether it meets very basic requirements. Is it written in English? Is it meeting the formatting requirements of the journal and so on? That's the first level of filter. If it does not, they will reject it and send it back to the author, asking them to fix the issues or indicating why the article is not acceptable. After that, it typically comes to the editor-in-chief and possibly people who are assisting the editor-in-chief in this filtering function, where they will look at this abstract and title and then try and make a judgment what this article is about, who should be the one who should be handling it. If they can't make that judgment, if things are not clear enough based on that, then obviously the article will be rejected as a desk rejection. They will also look at language and presentation issues to see if this is clear enough or there are things that need to be addressed. And again, those may be reasons for rejection of the article. Once the article has met all these requirements, then the article will be assigned to an associate editor. The editor-in-chief has broad expertise in the topic of the journal. The associate editors will have specific expertise on the topic of the paper. So they have more specialized expertise and more familiarity. They will also screen the article for the same type of issues which I outlined earlier. In addition, they will look to see whether there is adequate novelty and contribution over here. Okay. And if it's not the case, then obviously the article is rejected. If yes, it goes on to what is referred to as formal peer review. Formal peer review is where you are looking to get feedback from anonymous reviewers. They're anonymous to the authors, known to the associate editor, on the manuscript. And this may go through multiple rounds, where the reviewers may ask questions or ask for additional work or clarifications on topics, and then the authors may respond to those, with the associate editor acting as the intermediary between those. Okay. At the end of this final peer review, the associate editor will typically make a judgment saying whether this article has enough merit to publish or not. Okay. If not, then the article is rejected. If yes, it gets accepted and then it goes on to production operations to get published. In this process, also, you have things like cross-check interjected over here, which is looking to see how much content is duplicated from already published sources. So this is what you were looking to check for plagiarism, for example, if this article is plagiarizing other previously published work. So keep that in mind. Okay. A key message that I want you to go away from this slide is that this peer review consumes a lot of time from a lot of people. And these are experienced volunteers. All of them are unpaid in their jobs. They're doing this as an altruistic service to the community, and you're going to consume the time. So before you submit, make sure you understand this and value their time and also your own time. So if you think that this, you submit a poorly written article, you're not showing due respect for the time for everyone on the editorial board and also wasting your own time. Okay. So this is a key basis for a lot of the etiquette and ethics considerations in publishing, which I will talk about next. Okay. The various type of ethics issues that can arise, I will touch upon some of the common ones of these. Okay. A common issue is one of plagiarism. Okay. And plagiarism is considered a form of theft. It's use of another person's ideas or words without appropriate attribution. Okay. So the guidance on this is everything you write in your article is presumed to be your own words, ideas, figures, etc., unless you are quoting and citing. So never copy other people's words when writing an article. In the introduction, you're providing a summary. Even then, that summary should be in your own words. It's a summary of other people's work, but it's in your own words and in your own presentation. Okay. The quotations of that other people's words should be used very sparingly in situations where you really require. For instance, you may use a quotation from Gandhiji. Gandhiji said X, Y, Z, if that's relevant to your work. But these are very rare in our field that you have those type of quotations that you need to use. Associated with this is also the idea, if there is already published materials, you must cite and acknowledge these materials that you're making reuse of. And a common problem I see is with figures and diagrams. So if you're directly using, extracting a figure from a prior publication and reusing it, you must make sure you have the permission from the author and publisher, who's the copyright owner, and you also cite and acknowledge. Okay? And this may involve fees, paying fees in order to use that. If you've drawn this on your own, you should then say adapted from or based on. And by the way, this also includes your own prior published work. You should acknowledge the reuse of your own prior published work. Another common issue that arises for starting authors is the issue of duplicate publications. So it is just not acceptable to submit substantially the same manuscript for review in multiple journals or even multiple venues at the same time, in a journal and a conference at the same time. And to understand why this is the case, this is terribly wasteful of the resources that I talked about. You would take a lot of people's time, and now you're trying to take that time two times in two different places, or multiple times you submit it in multiple places. And this practice is just completely taboo in the world of scientific publishing. Also, you may be encountering copyright issues. If you're promising to transfer the copyright over to whoever you submitted the article to, then you cannot in good faith also give the same promise to the second person you're submitting it to. Some fake counter arguments that you may encounter. Some people may say, okay, I thought it would be faster if I tried two places at the same time. Well, that's not acceptable. That's just in the communities, the publishing, scientific publishing communities, that is not acceptable to waste everybody's time just because it's faster for you. You may say, okay, this journal was taking too much time, therefore I submitted to another place to see if that would be quicker. Well, what you can do in that situation is you can withdraw your work from the journal, and you have to do that before you submit to the other one, okay? Rather than say that this is what you did. A common point that arises is the issue of relationship between conference and journal papers. If you have a short, non-comprehensive conference article, that can evolve into a full-length journal article. And this summarizes the IEEE guidelines regarding that. Obviously, the later article should contain substantially more technical content than the earlier. And the later article should cite the earlier article and clearly indicate how things differ. All right. This is usually the case when you have short articles in the conference. So these are typically like 4 to 5 pages, and the journal paper is much longer, like 10 to 10 to 13, 14 pages. Okay. In some fields, the conference papers themselves are also quite long, and then they may be treated like journal articles. So check on the specific journal policy and ask in doubt. If you already published a conference paper which is 12 pages, then you really could not meaningfully extend it into a full-length article. You're better off publishing new work. Very quickly, authorship and acknowledgement. Authorship should be limited to those who have substantively contributed to the work and actually reviewed the manuscript and agree with the contents to being listed as an author. So if there are any ethics violations, all authors share responsibility. Okay, authors cannot claim that I was not aware of this, not aware of that. Okay, you should not try and make people who have sort of given you advice, tools, etc., as a co-author. It's a good idea to acknowledge them, and maybe you can let them know that you're acknowledging them. And obviously, it's a terrible idea to include a friend, colleague, or family member that has not really contributed technically to the work as an author. One final point. These days, people are getting very tied up on metrics in terms of how many times a paper is cited, what is the impact factor for a journal, and so on. Okay. As a result of that, people are also trying to manipulate these metrics. And that now is recognized as an ethics violations by IEEE. Okay. So things which you're doing specifically to influence either general bibliometric measures or personal citation counts are considered as bibliometric manipulation, which is a case of misconduct. So cite your own papers when they're relevant and not to increase the citation count. This is also true when you're reviewing. Make sure that you're not asking somebody to just cite your papers, even if they're not relevant. And as an author, you should not feel pressure to give into undue pressure to cite irrelevant material during the peer review. Complain to the associate editor or the editor-in-chief, and they will take appropriate action. Oh, I think I'm a little bit short of time, so I should actually go through this very quickly. I'll highlight that increasingly science is becoming much more collaborative. People are working across geographic boundaries and across boundaries of disciplines also. In this space, you should try and make your work reproducible by sharing data and code. Okay. This has some benefits for everyone. For the community, the benefit is that it makes it easy for other researchers to build up on your work. For you, this has the benefit that people can also cite your data as well as your code independently. And for data, there's no better way to ensure long-term preservation than by publishing the data on a repository. IEEE supports open science and reproducible research. In particular, for data, there is IEEE Data Port on which you can publish data, and it's currently free. In the limited promotion time, you can upload the data to be open access for no cost to you or to people who are accessing it. Okay. There's also CodeOcean, which provides a Docker-based platform for people to easily work with the code and also to share their code as authors. And then there's also preprint server tech archive. I will not have the time to go into these in detail, but I will just highlight these for your information. So with that, I'll summarize my main points. In preparing your manuscript, you want to focus on logical organization, clarity, and brevity in that order. If you don't have the right logical organization, then trying to focus on language, clarity, and brevity is the wrong focus. First, focus on logical organization, then focus on clarity and brevity. And advice I give to my students and to you is that you should start writing before you have all the work done. Because a lot of the ideas will come when you started writing. But do not submit until you've done your part. Don't think of the peer review process as a process for editing the manuscript, because you're going to take a lot of people's time, and you're also going to set a bad impression for yourself by submitting something which is poorly written. Okay. Details matter. So you want to make sure your work is presented well. If you have good work, but that is presented poorly, often the reviewers will misunderstand that. And then you will not get the chance, possibly, to have a second chance with them. Okay. And then last but not least, please participate in your community. Volunteer for reviews. Initially, maybe your supervisor can help. You can help your supervisor with reviews. And then as you become more senior as a graduate student, closer to completing your own PhD, maybe start doing independent reviews too. On publication ethics, the guidance I will give you is that familiarize yourself with the etiquette and ethics expectations for published work, and please adhere to these. Most of these are common sense, but then common sense is not really that common in our day-to-day lives. Etiquette in particular comes from established practices and can vary between communities. If you have doubts, it's better to always err on the side of being more polite. Okay, ask someone familiar with the community. Ask somebody who's published there, ask the EIC. Okay, and keep in mind, as an author and scientist, you are carrying your reputation as well as that of your co-authors and your institution on your shoulders. Just a few points to remember: all materials that you've used in your paper is assumed to be your own unless you explicitly demarcate and indicate by a citation. Nothing is exempt from this requirement. So acknowledge all sources of ideas via citation. Also acknowledge all prior work, including your own, and pay due attention to authorship requirements. I have some references here on additional resources for writing that you may want to look at. Also some additional resources on publication ethics that cover different aspects. In particular, this booklet on being a scientist from the US National Academies is something which I found particularly useful and would recommend to you for your reading. So I will stop here now and pass the baton on to Dhanu.
Sure, Professor. I hope I'm audible to everybody clearly.
Yes, Tom, you're audible now.
Great, thank you. Increase. So, great, thank you. Hello, good evening, everybody. Thanks, Professor Sharma, for highlighting various aspects of authoring a paper and ensuring that all those who have attended today will succeed in getting their paper published. I belong to the IEEE Client Services team, a group of information professionals, and we work closely with the libraries across the globe in ensuring the users utilize the institutional subscription effectively. Today, I'm here to provide a quick dive into how IEEE Xplore Digital Library can help you while you write a paper, and also a set of author tools and features which we have made available to all the researchers, which will fuel them in preparing the manuscript effectively. First, let me cover different aspects of how one can get ready to write. We have split them into 4 stages. Conducting a literature review, which is very important, and taking notes and how you can actually keep track of the ongoing research. It's also very important for any researcher to gather the references and also look at the citations as well. And also at the end, I will also let you know how, once you have drafted an outline, how we can actually submit a paper. Institutions across the globe provide access to different full text databases and also the abstracting and indexing databases. IEEE Xplore Digital Library is the full text database, and there are several abstracting and indexing databases which will aid in identifying, in finding the right set of articles. So you can contact your institution librarian and also library website to look at what kind of databases your library is subscribing. So here we are at the IEEE Xplore Digital Library homepage, and I've logged in as a user. During the month of March, we empowered almost every library in providing multiple access systems so that any user, maybe a student or a faculty or a researcher, can access the database remotely. So in case you are somehow unable to access the digital library subscription, that is the IEEE Xplore, please reach out to your library or you can contact us so that we'll help you to get the access. So here's the basic search box, and I've added 2 keywords which actually search for artificial intelligence and mobile robot. There are different ways to look at different content sets. Sometimes you're interested in looking at a keyword in a book or a conference or a course, you can actually use accordingly. On the top, you will see how many documents and also how they are split into different content sets. So some of you may be interested in only journal articles today. Some of you may be interested in conference proceedings today. Some of you just magazine articles, or some of you really are interested in looking at the future articles, that is what we call as early access articles, which are 10 at this point in time. You have different ways of resorting the articles by looking at the latest documents, which are pretty much will tell you these are some of the latest research which are published in this area. Some of you may be interested in which was the first article published in this area. So in this area, artificial intelligence in mobile robot, we go back to 1983 when the first article was published. You can also look at those papers which are heavily referred by the papers and also by the patents. Also, you have an option to just look at the articles which you can access on the left-hand side by choosing the subscribed content. So there are a variety of facets which will help you narrow down the results, like year, authors, author affiliation, publication title, article published in a journal or say set of journals. You can easily open the drop down and you can start searching for, say, I would search like Gaurav Sharma. So all his articles will, his name will come up, and once I check the box, his articles are displayed in that area. So if you'd like to search a keyword within the results, please use the box on the top left-hand side. And for this, we are looking at neurocontrollers. So slowly started narrowing down, and this is how the literature search is actually being carried out. So you can see from 7,000 to 84 to 370. So there are only 370 articles in the new set of results. So likewise, you can go on carrying out literature search based on your needs. One more option IEEE Xplore provides is looking at the high impact articles. That's by most cited by papers. You will see those articles which are referred heavily on the top. You can also look at most cited by papers, by patents, which will pull all those papers onto the top, which are heavily cited by patents. Recently, IEEE introduced a new feature called as most popular, that is the most trending article. So this will tell you by using most popular, you'll be able to look at which article has been heavily downloaded. Likewise, if I have to give you a glimpse of these here, at IEEE, we encourage authors to submit additional media files or say codes, data sets, or videos to facilitate research productivity. So you can also take a look at which journal carries more number of articles. In this, it is transactions and on pattern analysis and machine intelligence, followed by image parsing. The first one obviously is the IEEE's mega open access journal called IEEE Access. Once you want to know more about an author, you can click on his name and then follow him. You can also set alerts so that you receive an alert when a new paper by the author is published. So I've taken an example of Professor Gaurav Sharma himself here. So likewise, you can target specific publications once you've found the right focus. You can use various search functionalities, that is IEEE provides robust search functionalities like advanced search or say command search for multi-field or complex searches. You can either use say document title or say publication title index and use and or and not at the Boolean operators. You can also choose command search to have a closer search within with help of our proximity operators. We have given examples on this pages, so you can click on advanced search to follow all this. The next step is to take the notes and how you can keep track of what's happening in your area of interest. Use the IEEE Xplore personal account to stay organized while doing literature searches. If you are an IEEE member, you can use your member my IEEE ID and password. Personal account will enable you to have a personal space within the database where you can save search queries, set alerts for new articles in your area of interest, and alerts whenever your favorite journal's a new issue is posted onto IEEE Xplore digital library. And view your search history and use Collaboratech IEEE's network sharing platform IEEE Collaboratech to create a personal library of articles and many more. You can also manage saved searches by looking at, say, today you're looking at smart city. There are almost 14,000 articles. Tomorrow, if you'd like to receive an email alert when there is a new article published in this space, please use set alert and say, click on smart, give a title to it and then save. So as soon as you hit save, it goes and sits in your alerts, and you can visit the alert section and enable the alert here to receive alerts in the future. Sometimes when you've created complex search queries, you can also save them. That is what beneficial out of this space. You can also set alerts for your favorite journals. So today I have set alerts for, say, quite a few journals, and tomorrow I would like to receive alert when a new issue of IEEE transactions on effective computing is published. I will so that we don't have to visit IEEE Xplore Digital Library or browse or search the alert. IEEE will do the job for you all. And then you can also look at the search history, what has been carried out in the past. All of your 50s saved searches are saved, and you can use preferences to enable the same. So here we are, the last 50 searches are saved, and you can actually combine quite a few searches here on this page. The next is gathering references and citations. So when you build your bibliography, identifying key papers, then you have to look at references and citations. One paper's reference list can be actually, you'll be able to discover many more articles in that area. So please do use that. And also you need to cite references in your paper to support your research. So once where you can actually find the references for every paper, if you are on the article abstract page, you can follow the references, and the references list will come up. So you can actually go through, probably you may want to pick up, which is interesting. Likewise, you can also look at the citations that we have classified into articles available within IEEE and also other publishers. You can actually follow likewise. You can also look at cited by patents, how many patents are citing this article. So probably you'll be curious. So if you're an author and published in IEEE, you probably please do visit your paper and look at by patents as well. So we can actually probably encourage to see if your paper has been referred by papers and also the patents. You can also look at the metrics, how well your article is being cited by third-party citations like Web of Science, Google Scholar, and Scopus, and also Crossref. And we also give you how many times your article has been downloaded. So this actually gives you the impact of the article itself before you choose to further read the article. You can also look at the output. Say, for example, there are 3 articles you would like to switch to the, say, like to download the citations in either BibTeX, RF, or RefWorks. You can actually do that. And also you can download up to 2000 results into CSV format, wherein this sheet will give you all the details, the metadata of the articles. Then is finding the right publication and submitting your paper. You may find the publication recommender, which is one of our most used tool. So sometimes to begin with, you have the paper ready and you do not know where to find out the right journal. People like Professor Sharma and your own faculty members, and also some people whom you know, probably they're the first set of people, but still you can visit the IEEE publication recommender to look at which journal is right for me to publish an article. So I'm looking at data mining. Also, this tool will provide you to seek help in terms of you would like to publish before, say, some date, that is 31st of March 2021, which are the conferences. So I would like to publish before that. So click on get recommendation, and then the recommendations will come, and you will be able to follow the link and probably one of. So this is what our IEEE transaction on signal processing has. So it will actually give you more details on the this particular periodical. You can also look at the upcoming conferences within the IEEE. So click on, once you land onto the IEEE homepage, click on the conferences button, and upcoming conferences, that will list on all the conferences which are upcoming and spread into various territories, and probably looking at various fields of interest as well. So in India, there are like 60 conferences which are coming up in future in Prayagraj, or say Karangapalli, Coimbatore, Noida, and Bangalore, and few more cities. So you can actually follow them to get more information about these conferences. Our journal homepage within the IEEE journal page within the IEEE Xplore Digital Library also has a button to submit your manuscript. Please follow the on-screen instructions to submit the manuscript. So throughout this paper process, refer to the IEEE Author Center. This is a newly built site, was few years ago, and we keep on adding new functionalities to this. You'll be able to find out publication recommender tool. There's also, if you'd like to speed up the article submission process, we have the IEEE LaTeX Analyzer. You can also verify the reference list with the IEEE Reference Preparation Assistant. You'll be able to find out the template as well with the IEEE template selector. And also, you can, once you're done with your PDF, you can actually load your PDF with help of the IEEE PDF checker. This is a quick glimpse of the IEEE Author Center. It actually gives you by media type. You can also look at a quick search here, and then for the entire site. And also there are quick links provided onto this site. On the left-hand side, we provide information. So there is also a search option. There is expandable table of content. There is looking at most popular actions. So for example, this is some people have actually started to look at. And also there are quick links, and also there is a useful newsletter. I will just give you more information in a few minutes from now. You can also look at contextual table of contents, and there is streamlined text as well for resolution and size, some more help which you require here. There are 12 cores which we have loaded to this site to facilitate your writing journey, and hopefully that will be useful to all of you. If you have any suggestions, please do send us. Probably we look into that as well. To look at the template, so select the publication type, publication article type, and then you land into the downloading the template itself, so that you need to follow that particular template to submit your manuscript. There also you can speed up the publication by using the LaTeX Analyzer. There are some steps which are provided onto the site, in which you'll be able to follow the same. Again, there is a reference preparation assistant, and also PDF checker, which will be more useful to all of you. Not last but not the least, please do follow us, and we please do subscribe the authors at IEEE newsletter by sending an email to authors at IEEE.org, and we will provide you some interesting content with help of this. So please do follow the Author Lab in the IEEE Collaboratech for additional support. And that takes me to the end of this presentation. Thank you so much for your time. Before I hand it over to Ranbir, do stay informed on the IEEE publishing by following the Facebook and Twitter. You can also visit the IEEE Open Access Open Journal site, that is open.ieee.org. And if you'd like me or my colleague Ranbir to carry out a training at your institution on how to use IEEE Xplore more effectively, please do drop an email at training@ieee.org. Author queries, please do drop a note to authors@ieee.org. Thank you. Over to you, Ranbir.
So Dhanu, there are two questions based upon your presentation.
Yes.
How many open access journal IEEE has? That's number one. And number two is there a way that we can access IEEE Xplore off campus?
Absolutely. Yeah, thanks. I think we have around 21 open access journals at this point in time. And yes, we have empowered all the libraries, and we ourselves, myself and my colleague Ranbir, and also big team at our partner in India, EBSCO Information Services, we do regularly contact the users. So we have multiple ways to enable the access. If you are unable to access the IEEE Xplore Digital Library, please do drop an email to us say training at IEEE should be fine, and then we'll reach out to you. We have empowered the librarians now by providing the username and password to all the libraries. You can reach out to your libraries, or you can even reach out to us at training@IEEE.org to facilitate that. Hope that helps, Ranveer.
Am I audible, Dhanu?
Yes, you're audible. Would you like to take it over to end the session, or you have any more questions for Professor or myself?
I do not have any further question for you. I think we can have like 2 or 3 questions for Professor.
Sure.
Yeah. Can you hear me, Professor?
Yes, I can hear you.
Yeah. So
I-
I can see that you have answered most of the question via chat, and so considering the paucity of time, we may not be able to address all the questions. But yes, I have noted down all the questions so we can get back to the attendees via email. So let's
Sure.
take 2 or 3 questions, and then probably we can conclude the session.
Sure.
So the first question is there something called which we can consider as the best impact factor for the publication of the paper?
So I already touched upon this briefly in my presentation. I don't think you should use impact factor as a measure of the quality of a publication. Impact factor is the measure of popularity. How often has the work been cited, not of what is the merit or technical contribution. Okay. So people who think impact factor is a good measure should think that anybody from Bollywood is a better scientist than them, because they are really much more in the media, much more commonly cited. Okay. So scientific work you have to look at and to judge appropriately, and trying to rely on a single number to judge something is worse than trying to judge a book by its cover. So I would not suggest impact factor as being the single metric for assessing things.
Yeah.
And
So
the way to assess things, I would suggest, is that you start reading articles, and as you start reading, you will learn to discriminate yourself and recognize what is good work and what is not good work.
yeah.
Go ahead.
So there's one question, like this has been tossed by many attendees, and usually in my presentation I try to avoid this question because it is difficult to answer this question. But since we have you as a speaker, so I would like to give it to you. And this is like, what is the amount of plagiarism, allowed plagiarism in IEEE conferences and journals?
So there is no amount of acceptable plagiarism in terms of, yeah. So how do you make a judgment whether something is plagiarized or just coincidentally common between things? Okay. So there's a judgment call involved. Obviously, if you copied the entire paper, that is obvious. If you've copied substantial amounts of a paper, that's also usually obvious. If you copied one sentence, then that becomes a debate about what is the nature of the sentence. If this is a template sentence, for instance, you may say this paper is organized as follows. That's a common way most people will state things. Okay. On the other hand, you have a technical sentence in your paper, which somebody has worded in a very particular way. The chances that you will come up with the same wording are quite negligible. Okay. So the advice I would have is, rather than focus on what level of plagiarism is permissible, focus on not plagiarizing at all. Write your articles on your own. This is your work. This is your opportunity to present your work. As an author, be the author and present your work rather than copy from elsewhere. Okay. So the answer is really no amount of plagiarism is acceptable in any journal or conference.
That's a very good answer, I would say. The last question. I mean, there are many questions, but I will take this question. This is: can I publish a paper in a conference if my content points out a drawbacks or the deficiency of the latest published work and an idea to overcome the deficiency?
Okay. So as with most publication venues, it depends upon what is the focus and what is the audience. if you're at the level of writing a position paper, that would be quite appropriate. But usually conferences, when they're looking for position papers, they're looking for somebody who's well experienced and knows the field and already has published a lot of work in that area so that they can say, okay, this is what is the right. As a starting author, if all you're doing is saying, okay, this is a problem, and this may or may not be a solution, this may be a direction somebody may want to try, then that really does not contribute much to the community. So in that situation, I would suggest try your ideas and prove them to the point where you can show that it actually can overcome this deficiency. Otherwise, you're just trying to try and publish your speculations.
Sure, Professor.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Yeah. So there's one more question. Can we validate the other publisher work by new method is acceptable for publishing?
Can we validate other? So if you have a new method to solve a problem that somebody else has solved by a different method, yes, that is acceptable for publishing. You should then highlight what is the advantage, what are you contributing with the new method. There should be some benefit that your new method offers. Okay, if it's solving exactly the same problem, so the problem solved is the same. Maybe it has benefits in terms of efficiency. Maybe it's using less computational power. Maybe if you're doing this on an embedded platform, it's using lower power consumption. So you should then highlight what is the particular contribution and novelty that you're contributing. So sure, you can solve a problem that somebody else has solved by a new technique and have novelty in that, but then the onus is on you to show what is the novelty and what is your contribution.
Sure, Professor. So I think now at this point, we will close the forum for the questions. And thank you very much, Professor. Thank you very much, Thanu. And thanks to all the attendees for your patience, for your wonderful questions. I know that there are many questions in the bucket. As I promised you that I have noted down all the questions, and we will get back to you via email. You will get the recording of this session, and you will get the slide deck of this session as well. So